Greetings to everyone present. My name is Ankit Malhotra. I am the co-founder and president of the General Society of International Law, which is a student initiative under the aegis of the Center for UN Studies, under the guidance and tutelage of Professor Dr. Weston Bowski. The society was founded on the 18th day of November in 2020 and was launched by the Herbert and Rose Rubin Professor of International Law, Professor Jose Enrique Alvarez of New York University, along with the university's Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Raj Kumar, and a very dear friend of the society and center, Professor Dr. Mohan Kumar. The purpose of this society is to engage and also increase the student interaction with the subject matter of international law through its various initiatives. Rather than primarily being research driven, we intend to offer a host of experiences through skill building, thereby increasing the knowledge database available to students. The spring lecture series of 2022, entitled Colloquium Challenges to Global Governance and Humanities in the 21st Century, offers a compendium of scholarship from the academy and professional experience from the bar. Over the past year, the General Society of International Law has hosted speakers from foreign universities, the International Law Commission, United Nations, the Hague Academy of International Law, the World Bank, and other places of high reputation and also value. But never have we had the experience to host persons of such high reputation and also value to the Indian Armed Forces. We are exceptionally delighted and honored, deeply honored to be in this company. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to share a small reflection on what this lecture series aims to do. This lecture series, which we have organized, is an aim to understand law and social sciences and the humanities from broader, different and differing vantage points, acknowledging that law and also the social sciences involved in it are a creation of states. It is also important to understand these values that have shaped the law and also the factors which are involved in shaping this aspect. A broader study thus becomes crucial and also critical. It is important to develop a deeper understanding of Philip Jessup's magnum opus, A Modern Law of Nations, an introduction, when he said, and I quote him here, "So long as the international community is composed of states, it is only through an exercise of their will, as expressed through treaty or agreement, or as laid down by an international authority, deriving its power from states, that a rule of law becomes binding," end quote. But today, to speak and also remember the life of a legend, we have three stalwarts, the Indian Armed Forces. We dedicate this lecture to General Bipin Rawat, who we lost tragically and sadly. Today is his birthday, and to speak about him and the future of the armed forces, we have amongst us General Ved Prakash Malik. He served as the 19th Chief of Army Staff of the Indian Army from the 1st of October 1997 to the 30th day of September 2000. During the latter part of his tenure, he was also the chairman, chiefs of the Staff Committee of India for 2 years. As Army Chief, he had the dual responsibility of being an advisor to the government of India, as well as the commander of over 1 million strong army personnel. He managed all its functions to fulfill its national role and assigned missions. During his long military service, General Malik participated in several wars and counterinsurgency terrorist operations in the northeast Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. He was also involved in planning and execution of overseas operations in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and peacekeeping operations in Sierra Leone. In 1999, he planned, coordinated, and oversaw the execution of Operation Vijay to successfully defeat Pakistan's attempted intrusion in Kargil Siachen sector. Post his retirement, he's also nominated as a member of the National Security Advisory Board for 2 terms and was also the founder member of the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. General Malik was awarded the Ati Vishesh Sena Medal and the Param Vishesh Seva Medal for distinguished military services. We're delighted and extremely honored to have him amongst us. We also have amongst us Lieutenant General Dr. Rajesh Kocha, who is a highly decorated retired general officer of the Indian Army from Corps of Electronics and Mechanical Engineering with a distinguished career spanning 4 decades. He also holds a PhD in Human Resources Management from the Meerut University and an MPhil in Defense Management from DAV Indore University, and an MSc in Defense Studies from Madras University, a postgraduate diploma in Industrial Management from Military College of Electronics and Mechanical Engineering. He is also a graduate of the prestigious College of National Defense College as a fellow of the Institution of Engineers. He participated in the UN peacekeeping mission in Somalia and has represented the Indian Army on official delegations to France, United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy, Australia, and the Philippines. He has a rich experience of strategizing military leadership, human resource management, strategic planning, macro level policy formation, and operation logistics. We also deeply honored to have amongst us Lieutenant General A.K. Singh, who is a deeply involved in the society and serves as a strategic advisor to us. He is a lieutenant. He was also the Lieutenant Governor of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He is the ex-general officer of the commanding in chief, the Southern Command, an alumnus of the National Defense Academy, and was commissioned into one of the oldest regiments, which is the 7th Light Cavalry on the 17th of June, 1973. After a distinguished and long service in the armed forces, Lieutenant General A.K. Singh was entrusted with the responsibility of Administrator and Lieutenant Governor of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He took over as the 11th Lieutenant Governor of Andaman and Nicobar Islands on the 8th day of July, 2013. We are deeply honored and we are so privileged to have this panel of pillars and giants of the Indian Armed Forces to remember someone who India, and dare I say the whole world, lost as a military leader and a commander of leadership and also of discipline and also a reimagination of the role of the army and its caliber. Those words, I now invite our first speaker, General Ved Prakash Malik, to share his thoughts and perspectives on these two topics. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening and Jai Hind. My fellow panelists, General A.K. Singh, General Rajesh Kocha, and Ankit Malhotra, and other ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I must compliment the organizers for organizing this event in the memory of late General Bipin Rawat. He would have been 63 years old today. But as Ankit mentioned a while ago, on 8th December last year, we lost him in a tragic helicopter crash. And that crash also claimed the lives of his wife and 13 other officers and soldiers. General Rawat's biodata, his career profile and awards, they have been shared already on the flyer by the organizers, which I hope everybody has read. I will talk about him more as a person as I got to know him. His potential and leadership qualities, these were evident right from the days when he joined the academy. Mind you, only an all-round best cadet can win the coveted Sword of Honor. That is what he got when he passed out from Indian Military Academy. As a commander, he was always confident, always in control of the situations. And more importantly, he was never prone to threat risks. With his vast experience in different types of warfare on different fronts in India and abroad, he, I believe, was the most qualified person to become the Chief of Army Staff and later India's first Chief of Defense Staff. Apart from his professional competence, I can also mention his other qualities which impressed me. very high integrity, absolute straightforwardness when he was dealing with anyone, senior or junior, his very strong determination while when carrying out any given assignment, or what he thought was part of his vision. He was a popular officer amongst all the subordinates, particularly, I can say, amongst the soldiers. And if he was convinced, he would do anything for them. But if he thought that a proposal before him was not in the interest of the country or of the armed forces, he would oppose it, even if that earned a lot of criticism. For him, these criticisms, he never took them personally. He always said it was a professional hazard. I have never heard anyone speak adversely about him, anyone who has served under him, pass any adverse remark about him. Whoever got a chance, and if we have spoken to them, they've always praised him. Some people do criticize him for making some political statements or even being parochial. I do not agree there. I think it is more due to ignorance or not knowing him or realizing how a military chief has to function in our politico-bureaucratic environment in Delhi. Bipin was always a nation-first man. His demise, I believe, was a great loss for the entire nation. I'll now go over to the next part, which is rethinking the future of the armed forces. This became his major task or responsibility when he became the Chief of Defense Staffs, or the CDS, as we are calling it. Ladies and gentlemen, Prussian military thinker Clausewitz, we all read, particularly every military man has read him. He once noted each age has its own peculiar forms of war, and each therefore would also keep its own theory of war. The earlier character of armed conflict capabilities has now shifted to a new form. It is based more on knowledge and information. It requires continuous surveillance, precise surgical strikes at adversaries' nerve centers, his strategic facilities, combat reserves, or support facilities, wherever they may be. Deep inside also, they need to be targeted. Destruction and the attrition, as we see today in Ukraine war, I don't think is the right strategy. Personally, I have felt that most of it became unnecessary, and perhaps it could have been avoided, or it should have been avoided. Future war strategies include hybrid war. The Chinese also call them unrestricted warfare. In the future warfare, conventional and unconventional forces, which also include civilians, physical violence, and selective destruction and information manipulation, they get intertwined. In addition to high-tech, more lethal, long-range conventional weapons, there is emphasis on space, on cyber, and on stealth technology, use of drones and laser weapons. The government and its armed forces have to work as a whole. I'm repeating this again. The government and its armed forces have to work as a whole and not in watertight compartments as we have been doing till recently. Like Kargil war in my time and Ukraine war now, an armed conflict can flare up suddenly and it can surprise a nation. Once it starts, there is always a race against time to achieve the desired political objective, political aim. The operational environment is more lethal, It is continuous, everything happening at the same time. We need systems and processes which can generate greater speed and fluidity of intelligence and information inputs. Most importantly, we have to speed up and make our decision-making process more effective. Speeding taking decisions as fast as possible has become absolutely compulsory today. During any combat, it is essential to achieve synergy through integration and jointness amongst the armed forces. Integration doesn't mean unification or subsuming the characteristics and importance of any of the forces that are combined with us. It means conducting and integrating military operations
I'm sorry, we lost your video.
Yeah, I'm
sorry.
Okay. What I was saying is that integration doesn't mean it means synergy and jointness amongst the armed forces. Without subsuming the characteristics and importance of any of the forces. It means conducting integrated military operations and with a common strategy and jointly as far as its execution is concerned. What it means is integration of all forces' capability into a unified whole. It allows Army, Navy, and Air Force to retain their separate identities while operating as a single body. And jointness means greater synergy, greater effectiveness in war. It precludes wastage of resources by using an appropriate mix of force capabilities. A unified warfighting strategy, along with increased capabilities in cyber and space warfare, is the way forward. I can include special forces also in this. That is the way forward for our armed forces. It will streamline our military into a leaner, stronger, cohesive, and cost-effective fighting organization. This conceptual transformation of military assets requires a chief of defense staff and joint fighting capabilities through unified or joint military commands. A mandate given to General Rawat was facilitation of restructuring of military commands for optimal utilization of resources by bringing about jointness in operations, including through establishment of joint and theater commands. The CDS, ladies and gentlemen, is a multi-hatted person. He is the permanent chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, head of the Integrated Defense Staff, secretary to the Department of Military Affairs for financial as well as sanctioning purposes. He is a principal advisor to the Defense Minister on price service matters and an advisor to the Prime Minister in the Nuclear National Command Authority. He is a member of the Defense Planning Committee, and he is also responsible for the Defense Acquisition Council. The CDS's primary charter is integration and synergy in strategy and operational planning, and more effective use of integrated forces in combat. His major responsibilities are single point military advice, synergy in strategic and operational planning, joint military leadership and staff training, defense planning, procurements, and most importantly, the restructuring of military command. That was one of the more important charter that was given to General Rawat. At present, we have 17 single service commands, 7 each of the Army and Air Force, and 3 of the Navy. There are two tri-service commands, one in Andaman Nicobar, and the other is Strategic Forces Command. The Department of Military Affairs under General Rawat has been considering amalgamation of single service commands into integrated theater commands, Northern Land Theater, Western Land Theater, Eastern Land Theater, Maritime Theater Command, and Air Defense Command. These were under consideration and the work was going on. But mind you, such transition to joint theater commands involves a lot of discussion. And there are many complex problems. Let me mention just a few. Taking into account the different nature and directions of threats and challenges as perceived by different departments of the government and within the armed forces, that is Army, Navy, and Air Force, to agreeing to tri-service military strategy for each theater, keeping in mind the force level requirements and for each theater and the role that each service can play there. Our defense planning has to look into required capabilities holistically and then allot budget accordingly. There is also the need to resolve some fundamental command and control issues. For example, who will the theater commander report to? Will he report to Chief of Defense Staff, Chiefs of Staff Committee, or the Raksha Mantri? Joint commands would have commanders and staff from all 3 services on as required basis. And therefore, we have to create more joint training establishments to train our officers to work in such a tri-service environment. There is also the involvement of interministerial issues, like how will the BSF, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, and other land border forces, and the Coast Guard will work with the theater command. There's one more point I wish to make, and that is on Atmanirbharta. I think it's a very important point. We have to be Atmanirbhar in future. In fact, a big lesson that has come out not only from Kargil war, it has been repeated now in Ukraine war also, that we cannot afford to depend on others for our defense requirements. We have to reduce imports from wherever that may be, whether it is Russia or USA or other Western countries. Atmanirbharta, I believe, must be given a very strong push in our economy hereafter. In conclusion, the services, I believe, have a huge baggage of inter-service rivalry, turf guarding, and squabbling. Each service tends to zealously guard or oversee its own assets, and it always competes with others for a greater share of the budget. That becomes obstacle in creating sanity. So when these delays occur as far as the theater commands and all are concerned, it's not just the government amongst the three. These are 3 services also that tend to delay these decision making. Therefore, I believe that services must pursue parochialism, although it's not so easy and it takes time. Joint military commands is the future, but we can't rush into it. In the absence of a broader consensus amongst the stakeholders, and there being no political and economic advice given to the services on this matter, the restructuring cannot be decided in a hurry. General Rawat started this work, and it will now be a major task for his successor, whoever is now selected. That's it. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you for your words, respected sir. I now invite our next speaker to share his perspective and his thoughts on this topic. Please, sir.
Good evening, my fellow panelists, Lieutenant General General Ved Malik sir and Lieutenant General A.K. Singh. It's a great privilege to be in your presence here today. And of course, I also thank Ankit Malhotra from the Jindal University, the convener for this event, for inviting us to this event today. I also thank all the ladies and gentlemen who are present listening to us today for this forum. General Bipin Rawat was a personal friend of mine, and for the matter, 8th of December 2021 will be remembered as a black swan day in the history of our nation. India lost its serving Chief of Defence Staff, General Bipin Rawat, and many other brave hearts to a very unfortunate helicopter crash. General Ved Malik sir has beautifully brought out the excellent qualities of a human being, that is General Bipin Rawat, and as a great leader. And he's also put forth the future thinking of the armed forces. Today, I shall talk to you on the various ongoing reforms in the armed forces with the various initiatives taken by the late CDS as a backdrop. The magnitude of the loss was immense, as General Rawat, who was heading the Department of Military Affairs, along with a host of other responsibilities, was navigating the armed forces towards a number of reforms, which included the theaterization of commands, delineation of intricate command and control structure, impetus to defense acquisitions, and Atmanirbhar Bharat, as brought out by General Ved Malik sir, gearing up cyber warfare capability, and many other defense security related measures. I will not go on to the profile of General Bipin Rawat, because that has already been given in the flyer. But I would like to bring out that he was commissioned in the 5th Battalion of the 11th Gurkha Rifles, as that of his father, Lieutenant General Lakshman Singh Rawat. And for that matter, I would like to bring out, during his tenure as 3 Corps Commander, he was instrumental in reducing militancy in the Northeast. One of the highlights of his career was the 2015 cross-border operations in Myanmar. And during this operation, the Indian military responded successfully to an ambush by the NSCN-K militants. The mission was carried out under the operational command of 3 Corps Dimapur, under the supervision of General Rawat. He also, as the Vice Chief, had a major role to play in the planning for the 2016 Uri surgical strike, in which the Indian military crossed the line of control in the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. As brought out earlier, the CDS was entrusted with the onerous responsibility of bringing about the integration in the 3 services, and thereby give an impetus to the combat capabilities of the armed forces. The foremost being the creation of an integrated theatre command. And as has been brought out, there are 17 specific commands apart from the Tri-Service, Andaman and Nicobar, and Strategic Forces Command. The government had mandated the CDS to bring optimization within 3 years in the spheres of joint operations, communications, training, and logistics. He had also been tasked to streamline the entire perspective planning process for the defense acquisitions, with emphasis on Indianization. Towards that end, he was required to assign inter-service priority to capital acquisition proposals based on multi-domain operational requirements and the anticipated defense budget. The expectation was that these measures would enable the armed forces to implement a coordinated defense doctrine, foster jointmanship, optimize resource utilization, and lay the foundation for the establishment of joint theatre commands over a period of time. To initiate the task, studies were ordered for an analysis and formulation of an integrated capability development plan, as well as creation of 4 integrated theatre commands, which included the Army Western Eastern Theatre Command, the IF Air Defense Command, and the Navy's National Maritime Command. Each of these commands would perform its designated roles of operation planning, training, and maintenance under the overall supervision of the service headquarters. However, due to its inherent structure, command and control, there were issues of existing commands to transit into an integrated command environment. The Indian Air Force had certain valid reservations on how the restructuring was to take place. A positive indigenization list was formulated, which consisted of defense equipment which would be Indianized in the country. And that is what has been brought out by General Ved Malik sir about Atmanirbharta. The need for keeping up the momentum of all these efforts was increasingly felt in view of the prevailing geopolitical and security situation in the country today. The massive development of PLA at the LAC presents a formidable challenge to take forward this unfinished agenda to its logical conclusion within the targeted time frame. It is irony that the integrated defense staff came into being in 2001, but the integration remained on paper. We also need to be aware of the fact that the process of setting up theater commands was delayed due to certain issues which came up. After all, India did not want a situation which emerged in the United States when Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act had to be invoked when the armed forces did not arrive at a consensus towards acceptance of theaterization of commands. To ensure that the process got underway, 4 different study groups, each headed by a 3-star ranked officer, were ordered. The CDS was responsible for formulating the capital acquisition plans for all the 3 services. To carry forward the ICDP, or the Integrated Capability Development Plan, the study would be focusing on India's security threats, available budgets, military equipment required to meet the envisaged threats. The study would align to the defense acquisition procedure, which came out in 2020, and work out capability development along the 10 years perspective, divided into 2 5-year plans. Other domains looked after by the CDS pertain to such areas as information warfare, cyber, and psychological operations. The late realization of these aspects has seriously impacted the efficacy of the armed forces. Therefore, the creation of a defense cyber agency under the CDS is a positive development. As the integration will shape up, the information warfare and cyber will get dovetailed to become a part of the overall fighting doctrine. So it is very important, as also brought out by General Ved Malik sir, that the aspect of jointness would be in the area of logistics and training. The setting up of 3 joint logistic nodes was done at Guwahati, Port Blair, and Mumbai to achieve this integrated approach. If we have to embark on a new dawn, the process initiated needs to be followed up with sustained efforts. The new CDS will have to overcome the inertia and start evaluating the various studies ordered to be able to draw a roadmap for the future. The creation of an air defense command entails detailed deliberations on inter-services communication, integration of multiple origin radars, early warning and command, and control functions. Similarly, geographic and maritime commands merit much greater deliberations over considerations of the span of control, inter-service communication architecture, and evolving an appropriate manning and staffing pattern. The onus of working out the revised time frame for these transformative changes and apprising the national leadership rests with the CDS. This, however, remains at a best a work in progress. A review of the overall security environment and threat perception across multiple domains would be required. This would form the basis of force restructuring and capability development of the 3 services. A 5-point action plan is there to need to streamline the existing tri-service organizations, jointness in its true sense to be promoted, which would need emphasis. The points are integrated tri-service surveillance and communication networks, joint operations, training, logistics, including transport, repair, and maintenance. Formulate a detailed roadmap for the creation of joint commands and theaterization and field it for a testbed evaluation. Timelines be realistically evaluated. It took the United Nations Armed Forces more than 15 years to be fully integrated in all respects. Develop an integrated concept of conventional warfare, strategic deterrence, and warfare in asymmetric domains. This should include an approach to gray zone threats. The future warfare is likely to be a mix of conventional and gray zone warfare. To conclude, certain key points: the requirement of integration to fight future war is important. The urgency to implement defense reforms needs to be calibrated and deliberated. There is a need for strategic review and review of joint doctrines. There is a need to adopt a top-down approach towards implementing the reforms. Entrenching the optimization of resources of all 3 services and sister organizations is the need of the hour. And a threat-based India-specific model of theaterization conforming to the geography of the country should be planned and implemented. As can be foreseen, the challenges are immense. Apart from the issues of theaterization and capability building, there is a need to further the Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, as very beautifully brought out by General Ved Malik sir. Today, our country is faced with a number of threats. The Ladakh border is extremely volatile, with the PLA flexing its muscles. The proxy war and infiltration in Kashmir continues unabated. The situation in Afghanistan is also not conducive to the overall stable security environment. Therefore, it goes without saying that the new CDS will have its task cut out and must give a push to these reforms, lest we miss the opportunity to strengthen and integrate the armed forces. Again, General Bipin Rawat was a strong proponent of tri-services integration. He infused renewed impetus to the organizational restructuring and laid out a clear roadmap for creation of integrated theater commands. He worked relentlessly to foster jointness in every field and promoted modernization of Indian armed forces through self-reliance. A visionary, General Bipin Rawat ushered transformative reforms in operational as well as administrative domains and left behind a legacy of untiring endeavors in support of national cause. General Rawat epitomized the stellar character of a military leader who led from the front and kept the national interest supreme, always and every time. Jai Hind, and thank you very much.
Thank you for those inspiring words. Certainly move heavens and mountains with the caliber and also the motivation that the late CDS provided us. I now turn towards our final speaker to share his thoughts and perspectives on this topic. Sir, floor is yours.
Respected Chief General VP Malik, co-panelist General Rajesh, Kocha, and Chair Ankit. It's indeed a privilege to be part of the deliberations, and I will briefly share my views on both the topics. On our erstwhile CDS, General Bipin Rawat, the Chief has spoken, and I endorse fully what he said. It was indeed tragic that we lost him when we needed him the most, where he had so much more to contribute, especially towards reform in the higher defense setup and integration of the armed forces. Having known him from our tenures together in Military Operations Directorate, he was a thorough professional with a very visible intensity in whatever task he took up. And that intensity sometimes led him to be misread by others, and we have seen on some of his statements. We interacted on numerous occasions when he was chief and CDS, and one found him very earnest in his quest to reform, reorganize, and modernize the Indian Army and later the Indian Armed Forces to meet the challenges of the 21st century. I can just sum up by saying that he will be sorely missed, and his successor has big boots to fill up. It's a very challenging task which General Bipin Rawat took up with full gusto, and I dare say that he did move us quite a distance on integration. We all are aware that the three services have failed to integrate on their own. Without naming a service, there are different views, and I think finally it was the PM who gave a directive towards this, and it is now the onus is on the Raksha Mantri and the future CDS to make it happen. And I dare say that where ideal is if the three services can talk it out and agree to the direction and the methodology, but where they cannot, then there's no other choice. We seem to be the only professional army left that still works in different silos. And now let me come to military futures. To start with, let me state quite emphatically that military futures is to a large extent imaginable, if not completely predictable. For this to happen, one must be clear on the profound changes that are taking place on and off the battlefield, the impact of the digital revolution, and the multi-domains which are being contested. So let me start with just a word or two on the character of conflict in the 21st century. A few decades ago, even in, I dare say, in the time when General Malik was the chief, it was relatively easy to talk about the likely future contours of conflict in the 21st century. It is no longer so. Shades of grey have crept in. Threats are not easy to quantify and sometimes even to identify. There's a merging, a fusion of various types of warfare, and deterrence, coercion, and escalatory dynamics has been turned on their head. The modern multi-domain battle space has expanded to include space, cyber, and cognitive domains, in addition to the traditional air, land, and sea domains. The manifestations would encompass non-kinetic confrontation, and we saw a glimpse of that in Ladakh recently, non-contact warfare, contract warfare, and traditional armed conflict in its hybrid avatar, all under an informational gaze. Technology is influencing the multi-domain battle space like never before. The fourth industrial digital revolution is characterized more by fusion of technologies that is blurring the line between the physical, digital, and cognitive spheres. Applications involving artificial intelligence, quantum computing, machine learning, robotics, and genetic engineering riding on communication highways have very distinctly impacted war and conflict in the 21st century. Drones and swarm bots are becoming increasingly popular both with state and non-state actors. Syria and the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict have witnessed their devastating effects. India has been a late starter and has much to catch up on. Almost a year before General Rawat passed away, I presented a book to him called Wired for War by P.W. Singer, dated 2010, which made us realize where America was in 2010 and we hadn't even started. I think this is a subject, whoever comes in next as the CDS, he will have to take this under his personal aegis and make sure that it gets the right impetus. A word about the strategic environment around India. When we survey the strategic environs around India, it becomes fairly obvious that there may be few others who face greater strategic military adversity. So, what possibilities does one see for war and conflict in the next 1 or 2 decades? First, of course, an ongoing proxy war in J&K, leading to a limited conflict initiated by either side. I repeat, by either side, which has myriad manifestations. The above could drift into higher escalation levels forced by turn of events. A non-kinetic crisis like the one in Ladakh, escalating into a serious limited stroke all-out kinetic and cyber exchange between India and China, involving missiles, armed UAVs, cyber, and space. Though chances are less, a full-blown kinetic war initiated on either flanks cannot be ruled out. An Indian intervention necessitated by humanitarian considerations in the IOR at the request of the host government. And lastly, though remote, we would be foolhardy to preclude the challenge of a two-front activation. Before I go further, a word about the strategic focus for the future. Let me say, and the chief would be aware, that India prides itself with retaining strategic autonomy, as we have exhibited recently over our stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. However, the hallmark of the strategic success of any country is whether its strategic leaders are able to expand, not constrain the country's range of strategic options. Here, India's record is not very encouraging. We are yet to articulate a formal national security strategy, despite much noise periodically on the same. It seems it suits everyone to keep this situation of ambivalence. It suits the political hierarchy, the bureaucrats, and may I dare say, to some extent, even the armed forces. More alarming is the fact that the politico-strategic realm has started eyeing military operations as a conduit to gaining internal political advantage. I think we are treading on dangerous grounds here, and a course correction would be highly desirable. So let's look at how India should look at the future. First is, as far as military strategy is concerned, we have moved to a more rigorous form of offensive defense. And if I can call it, as far as Pakistan is concerned, from restraint to aggressive retort. And we saw that post the Uri and Balakot strikes, a new normal of aggressive retort has been established by India, and therefore it won't be business as usual anymore. Pakistan's nuclear bluff has been called, and they have been made aware that there are limits to India's patience, and crossing India's threshold will cost Pak dearly. The ball is clearly in their court. A word about our operational philosophy. Our operational philosophy, which was first issued in 2009 when I was DGPP, talks of punitive deterrence against Pakistan. And finally, we seem to have achieved it at Balakot after many slips, example, even in of Parakram. Against China, it used to be dissuasion. And we articulated a new philosophy of credible deterrence. Again, we saw a glimpse of that credible deterrence when we occupied the Kailash range in August 2020. Let me remind you that deterrence only works where it is backed by strong willpower and strong power. That's the lesson we are learning the hard way. Next, I come to shifting our focus to the northern borders. For the future, in my view, two major strategic shifts are warranted in our higher defense mindsets. From Pakistan-centric to China-centric orientation, and from sub-conventional to new generation warfare. An excessive CIA and line of control focus has taken a yet to be fully analyzed toll on our preparedness for the primary role. It is more than obvious that in geostrategic terms, while Pakistan may be the immediate irritant, China is the long-term challenge. But what about the nature of the contest with China? Well, China is not an irrational power. It is unlikely to spoil its ascendant role by resorting to an all-out war with India. This is very different, however, from deftly weaving force into its statecraft to aggressively pursue its interests and constrict India's geostrategic space through deft leveraging, particularly in the non-kinetic and non-contact domains. While war fighting has descended to domains of cyber, space, precision-guided long-range missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles, including swarm drones, territorial contests have, at least in our context, will always remain contingent upon diktats of geography, vagaries of very hostile terrain, and of course, military capabilities adapted to such area of conflict. The Indian Army has experience in warfighting in such hostile terrain, including the super high altitude, and both the adversaries are well aware of it. This should act as deterrence enough. Therefore, developing layered, intertwined military response options within a carefully thought through escalatory frame is something we need to attend with dispatch. The military mindset needs to stop thinking of itself only in terms of a last resort option to win wars. It must now also diligently apply itself to an even higher order skill how to avert wars without losing face and protecting our vital interests. Given the burgeoning economic differential with China, it is quite apparent that we will not, for the foreseeable future, be able to match Chinese defense spending rupee for yuan. We need to, however, spend significantly more to at least sharpen our conventional and asymmetric capacities, as also optimized by way of defense reform and structural overhaul, which both the previous speakers have elaborated on. Maybe we cannot get stronger, but we can certainly get smarter. More important, and please hear this, more important, fixing the military time and again is not going to be good enough unless we fix the politico strategic outlook too and develop the civilian expertise and capacities to tackle a formidable adversary like China and a crafty one like Pakistan. War and conflict, after all, are not spectator sports for the militaries to fight and for civilians to observe from the sidelines. Transformation and reorientation of the Indian armed forces is an ongoing exercise, and it's a vast subject, but certainly there is much to be done there. And lastly, let me point out, while we can fix all these things, what continues to play and will play a very critical role in the future is military leadership. And that's a separate subject in itself. We need to prepare leaders who will be able to meet the challenges of the 21st century as we see them coming up at us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your very enlightening words. Now we dedicated this talk to the late CDS, but before we close, I just want to invest a moment to hear perhaps his last address, which he dedicated to the Indian soldiers. There's a video which was shared online. I uh, I downloaded it
Ankit,
and I just
Ankit, Ankit, can
sir,
I, before you show the video and close,
please.
I think we don't get such wonderful opportunities to have a chief with
Yeah.
us. And I would like to ask him a pertinent question because there's nobody else who can answer it better than him. Sir, may I have your permission?
Please go ahead. Okay. Certainly.
Sir, the chief of all the three services and now also the CDS are multi-hatted appointments. And you mentioned that. While the CDS's main task is to understand the political, and now the CDS, earlier the chiefs, while their main task is to understand the political strategic directive from the government and translate it to appropriate military strategy to achieve the desired ends. But my question to the chief is beyond this on two specific counts. The role of the chief in harmonizing the interests of the officers and soldiers with the directive oblique direction outlined by the government where the two are not in harmony. First question. The second is role of the chiefs and CDS in safeguarding the core values of the armed forces like apolitical nature, which are still intact, which we all cherish, but which are certainly under some stretch in the 21st century, and we need to consolidate. Sir, your views on this? I hope I am not being difficult. It's a genuine thing which
No.
nobody can answer except you.
Uh, Firstly, I must say, I have to mention this that I retired about 20, 21 years ago, in fact. And there is no doubt that the environment has changed. Many things have remained the same, but a certain amount of politico-bureaucratic environment, if I can use that word, has definitely changed. As far as the politicization is concerned, My son is also in the army. He's a brigadier today. And in fact, you have trained him also. So by and large, what I see is that people in the armed forces are not really concerned about the politics. They continue to have that ethos of being apolitical, which is a very good thing to see. I'm not talking of the higher level, but I'm talking of the middle level as well as the junior level. They are more concerned with their task and they go ahead with that, which is a good thing that is happening. At the senior level, there are some people who probably get tempted looking at the hoping that they will probably get some appointment from if they follow the politicians. But my own take on this, my own feeling on this issue is that this hasn't worked for the civil services, including the police, and it won't work for us. So let us continue to maintain this apolitical attitude. And that is best not only for the armed forces, but definitely it is the best for the nation also. The second point that you make is that while the chiefs, and that includes now the Chief of Defence Staff, they are always bound to follow whatever political directions are given to them. But when they are following the directions, obviously they have a fair amount of autonomy within their own services in that. That's a good value system that we have been following. And the leaders within the armed forces, they work on their own, and wherever they feel that it is not serving the purpose of their subordinates, then they have to fight with the politicians or the bureaucrats to be able to get whatever is due to them. Unless the soldier is happy and contented, he will not be able to fight. Nobody knows it better about the morale issues than the leaders within the armed forces themselves. And sometimes it takes time, sometimes it can be done depending upon the opportunity. But I feel that you cannot really divest this responsibility despite whatever task that you may have been given. When we are talking, the responsibility of a chief, including the Chief of Defence Staff, is to prepare his force to be able to undertake the task that has been assigned by the political authority. And that cannot be looked into without looking at the human resource. So it's not only the acquisition of weapon system or the training, the Atmanirbharta. A major role is played by the human resource. And as we have always been saying, that the man behind the gun is more important than the gun. The quality of a gun keeps changing, and therefore the man who has to use that gun, his quality also must keep changing, and his morale is always of utmost importance.
Sir, thank you for a very enlightening reply, and I hope a lot of our senior officers are able to see this reply of yours. It will be a good guide for them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll now share my screen and we can watch the video, which is not too long, and after that we can close.
स्वर्णिम विजय पर्व के अवसर पर मैं भारतीय सेना की सभी बहादुर जवानों को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं। भारतीय सेना की 1971 की लड़ाई में जीत की 50वीं वर्षगांठ को हम विजय पर्व के तौर पर मना रहे हैं। मैं इस पावन पर्व पर सशस्त्र सेनाओं के वीर जवानों को याद करते हुए उनके बलिदान को श्रद्धांजलि अर्पित करता हूं। 12 से 14 दिसंबर तक इंडिया गेट पर विभिन्न प्रकार के कार्यक्रमों का आयोजन किया जा रहा है। यह बड़े सौभाग्य की बात है कि विजय पर्व अमर जवान ज्योति की लौ की छाव में आयोजित किया जा रहा है, जो कि हमारे वीर शहीदों की याद में स्थापित की गई थी। हम सभी देशवासियों को इस विजय पर्व के जश्न में सम्मिलित होने के लिए आमंत्रित करते हैं। अपनी सेनाओं पर है हमें गर्व, आओ मिलकर मनाएं विजय पर्व। जय हिंद।
Before we formally close, I'd just like to thank our speakers for taking out time to do this. And a small note from my end, I was fortunate enough to visit one of these theaters in Firozpur with my grandfather, Colonel Satish Khanna, who was a part of the 3 Grenadiers Regiment and has fought 2 wars for his proud country. His battalion was kind enough to gift me a book of the regiment, and the insignia of his battalion reads Sarvada Shaktishali. And with those words, I thank our servicemen who've devoted their life, who've devoted their entire being to this country and are ready to either come in the Taringa or have it around their shoulders. We are so thankful to you and for your services to this country. Jai Hind, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankit, and bye, sir.
Thank you, Ankit. Thank you very much. Thank you, AK.